Jumping into Bluebook number 4, reading module 2, the easier module 2. Looking at number 1 here, I'll skip straight to the blank space. Expecting to see continued growth, some analysts blank that the revenues will more than double. So they are expecting this continuation. So an expectation feels like prediction is going to be pretty similar to that. I don't see anything that would lead us to worry, deny, or produce. Again, matching expecting to predicting. Number 2, jumping straight to our blank space, a blank plant on the other hand. So we want to master our transitions too. On the other hand is going to be changing, contrasting from how we started our passage. So on the other hand, we'll have smooth surfaces and uniformly green coloration. Again, it sounds positive, but let's make sure we're contrasting here. So in the beginning, they said damage, discoloration. On the other hand, a healthier plant, right? One that's not being damaged. So we already can kind of see that it's going to be D here. Simple doesn't fit, a beneficial plant doesn't fit, and definitely not a struggling plant. So D here. Number 3, again, looking straight at our blank space, I see these other researchers readily blanked her work as groundbreaking. This recognition. So this is perfect parallel structure. Whatever these researchers did, they readily blanked. It's going to be a synonym of recognizing. I look through my answer choices here, and again, to acknowledge something is to recognize it, right? They are not ensuring, they're not denying, and they're not underestimating. It's going to be A for this one. Number 4, again, jump to our blank space. While the principal chief and cabinet officials blank those laws by devising policies and administering them. So we're looking for something to kind of maybe put those laws into action, right? By devising them and administering them. So to presume is to assume, so that's not going to fit here. To improvise those laws is not administering them, it's changing them. And again, mimicking is going to be copying them. Administering is like putting them into use, putting them into place, or implementing them. So A is the perfect answer here. Number 5. For this exhibition, this photographer blanked a series of new images based on a series of alphabet posters from the 1970s. So again, it's like they made this series, right? This new series. So as soon as I see restored, it's not going to be restored because it's creating something new. They're not challenging anything. They're not validating something, verifying, making sure something is correct. They are creating this new series to fit here. Number 6, researcher led a 2020 study showing that individual acts of kindness can blank this pro-social behavior across a larger group. Okay, I'm already getting a feeling like it's like spread, something like that, but let's see. They found that bystanders that witness a helpful act become more likely to offer help. So again, this ability to kind of spread from one to a group of people. It's not require, it's not remember. Again, definitely not discourage. This would be like an antonym. Foster is just going to be kind of like a synonym of spreading. It's help fostering, spreading, encouraging that behavior. Number 7. Out of the vocab into the reading section, and here we're analyzing our underlined sentence. So with these, context is usually important, but we can just jump straight to our underline. The female cuckoos have been seen laying eggs in the nests of other birds when those birds aren't there. So just to get more context here, maybe we can make an assumption about that. Some birds don't raise their own chicks. So we already read that these birds, instead of raising their own chicks, are laying their eggs in other birds' nests. Maybe these other birds end up taking care of them, but let's just confirm that here. After the eggs hatch, the non-cuckoo parents will typically raise the chicks. So that's it. We got our context for our underlined sentence. Let's look for that here. A physical feature, not what it's doing. The appearance, again, it's kind of the same thing as A. It offers a detail about how they carry out the behavior discussed in the text. Very, very possibly true. How the other birds react to the behavior, no. So again, the other behavior described in the text was that some species don't raise their own chicks. These birds are planting or laying their eggs in other birds' nests, so they don't have to take care of them. It's going to be C here. Number 8, we have a main purpose problem. I look up here for extra info. An elderly shop owner is looking at a picture that he recently acquired. Okay, so it seemed that the picture failed to fit in with the rest of the shop. This young fellow who was persuasive let him have it for what he called a song. That means like he's getting a really good deal on it. It was only a little out of the way store, framing of pictures, The old man looked around at his, okay, so he's describing his other paintings, views of the city, pictures of cats and dogs, and landscape. It doesn't belong here. He fumed, so he's mad. But I wonder if they kind of conclude with something a little bit different. And yet, so there's another transition word. Yet, again, is changing. It seemed like he was mad, but once I see yet, I know it's going to contrast. He was secretly proud of his acquisition. There was dignity in his scowling as he shuffled around looking for a place for the picture to fit. So we have a big contrast here. That's definitely our main idea. There's parts of the painting that he's mad about, but there's also parts of the painting that he's happy about, right? So the main purpose, to reveal the shop owner's conflicted feelings. I already know it's this one because, again, we see a contrast. Let's go through the rest. It's not resentment of the person. Again, maybe he calls him persuasive. Maybe he's a little bit mad that he bought this painting and it doesn't necessarily fit. But again, it's a contrast between how he feels about the painting, not the person. To describe the items that he most highly prizes, not true at all. And again, this is a pretty tricky answer here. To explain the differences between the new and other pictures in the shop, they do barely mention that. But remember, to explain the differences, that's going to be very detailed. That's going to be going through, this had this colors, these have these colors. This has this. They actually don't tell us anything about the new painting, just that it, in a way contrasts with what landscape, views of the city, and pictures of cats and dogs. That's not enough for this to be our main idea in D, explaining the differences. It's going to be his conflicted feelings in A. Number 9, our classic text 1 versus text 2. With these, most of the time, you're going to get a contrast. Try to get a connotation, is text 1 positive or negative? Is text 2 positive or negative? And then how one would respond to the other. So text 1, we have digital art. Isn't really art at all. This one is pretty clear. It seems like this is going to be our negative passage, but just let's keep going. It doesn't require skill. So right there, I can kind of stop. I know this is going to be our negative passage. Let's look at our second passage. The painting program used involves more than just pressing a few buttons. We can already assume that they're going to say it's more advanced than text 1 let on. They need to be familiar with sophisticated software. So right there, I'm done. We just need enough for each passage to justify, is it our positive, is it our negative? These are our connotations here, and they want to know how our positive passage would respond to our negative passage. This is where you want to practice kind of doing it on your own first. How would the positive person respond to the negative person? They would say something like, hey, like it's actually more advanced than you're describing it as, right? So I go through 1, or A, by arguing that it can be still be displayed traditionally. It's not about how it's displayed. It's actually much harder to use a tablet and stylus. They're not saying that the digital art is harder than traditional art. They're just saying that there is also difficult things involved in digital art as well. By insisting that digital art requires artistic abilities and skill, even if it uses less tools, 100% what they're describing, it's probably C. By admitting that most digital artists don't think fundamental drawing skills are important, that's a concession. We're not going with a concession. C is the second text defending that digital art is still requires skill. That's all. Number 10, a chart problem. Remember with these, ignore your chart for now, get direction from your passage, then we can look at our chart. We have organic farming. It reduces environmental harm. Okay. They're a small fraction of the total farms, but they've been becoming more popular. So we have like a positive. They're saying we want a direction that's in the positive direction. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, here's an example. In 2016, California had between 2,600 and 2,800. There's 28. There's 26, so that's true. And so it looks like all they want us to do for this chart problem is give them a second example. So we look through our answer choices. I see Washington is between 600 and 800. So that's true. Probably already our answer, but let's just make sure. New York had fewer already. We don't like that it's going in a different direction than our first example. California was between. So why would they use an and then say this other one is fewer? We can just double check. It's not fewer than 800, so it's wrong anyway, but it wasn't in the correct direction anyway. In C, I see Wisconsin and Iowa each had, so we look at these two. Wisconsin and Iowa, they're pretty different from each other. This one is less than 800. It's not going to fit in there. Pennsylvania had more than 1,200. Also not true. It had right about 800. So not too bad for our chart problem. Number 11, we have a short story. John was a hard worker who was fully dedicated to his job as a water carrier. Which quotation most effectively illustrates? So let's just find one that describes him as a hard worker. Very happy, he would jog home. Okay, doesn't describe how hard of a worker he is. He learned that it might not blow his whistle to halt traffic. Okay, that's describing how he deals with traffic. From early in the morning to the fall in the afternoon, he would go fountain to fountain, and his lean body accustomed to bending that he never thought of straightening it. Okay, this one kind of describes that he's working really long hours. Let's see if there's a better answer. When his first jugs had worn out, he had buried them in the necks of their corner where he slept, and they were now his treasury. So again, this describes him, again, from morning to afternoon. He would go here and there, and he would never straighten out his back. He was working all day. This is going to be our best answer here. Number 12, we have a poem, a nighttime scene on a body of water, an element of nature as an active participant in the experience. Okay, let's find what describes that. Through the water, the moon writes her legends in light on the smooth, wet sand. Again, already probably our answer. We want that an element of nature is an active participant in the experience. Active, we want a verb. The moon writes her legends. I can't imagine another answer being right here. Softly, the water ripples against the canoe's curving side. That's just normal water rippling. The snow white petals, no. The moon in her wayward beauty is ever and always the same. So that's describing the moon, but we don't get that is an active participant. It's going to be A because the moon writes. Number 13, a really good one. Let's ignore our table and jump straight into the passage. We have these people that recently examined this diverse plant community. The researchers calculated that if these individual plants were randomly distributed. So all that phrase means is imagine someone walking through the landscape with these plants, randomly throwing them. There'd be no organization to them. And they're saying that if this happened, only about 15% of these individual plants would be with other plants. So that's kind of our expectation is, especially when they give you a number in these passages, we highlight that, about 15%. I could already glance at our table now that we have a little bit of direction, and I see that the only percentages they list, patches or these individual plants found with patches of vegetation, much higher than the 15% they expected. But we can go ahead and finish this passage. They say that they counted the number of plants compared to what it would be expected, and based on these results, they claim that the plants that grow in close proximity to other plants gain an advantage. So again, if their expectation was 15%, and they found that almost up to 60% of plants were growing with other plants, it would make sense that there is some form of an advantage. Why is it that so many, a majority, 60% of plants grow with other plants? Probably because they get an advantage. Let's go through our answers. Let's see what we can do to match our claim. For all the species, less than 75%. So this is a classic. The answer is correct according to our graph. All of these are less than 75%, but it doesn't go along with our direction. Remember, their expectation was 15%. These are much higher than their expectation. They're never going to give us the direction of less than. We want an answer that says it's much higher than their expectation. The greatest number of plants growing in the patches of vegetation was this. Again, doesn't really match our direction, and it's just wrong. Again, all we want is our general, our result was much higher than expectation, so we can get rid of this. For these two, the lib and the moro, the percentage growing in patch was less than expected. No, 59% and 59% is much higher than 15%, much in the wrong direction. And finally, D, for each species, it was substantially higher than if it was randomly distributed. That's our answer. And that just goes to show that once we get our direction, their expectation was 15%. Our results are much higher. That's all I'm looking for in my answers. Number 14, we have the poet Walt Whitman is an essay. In this essay, they explore the value of literature, arguing that a society's spiritual well-being depends on the character of its literary culture. So we just want to find one that says literature is really important, right? I start with A. Poetry, which brings together or separates, fortifies, anguish, shores or demolishes, a lot of contrast, which gives or robs men, is more necessary to a people than industry itself. I don't think I have to read any further. That sounds like they're saying literature is really important. Let's go through the rest of the answers just in case. Every society brings to literature its own form of expression. Okay, so that's just saying that each society has, like, there's different ways to express literature, not saying how important it is, right? C, where will a race of men go when they have lost the habit of thinking with faith about the scope and meaning of their actions? I don't see anything about literature in C. In D, listen to the song of this hardworking, satisfied nation. Listen to Walt Whitman. Again, that just hypes up Walt Whitman, doesn't say anything about literature being important. It's just going to be A here. Number 15, we have this ancient civilization. The extremely hot and sunny weather helped crops grow very quickly, but it also made it hard to keep the crops from drying up and dying. So they used water from the rivers. This method worked so well that they could often harvest more crops than they needed as a result. So again, if they had more than they needed, how can we logically complete this? Something about storing them, right? Harvested crops only on the hottest days, doesn't make sense. Found ways to shield their crops. Again, we're talking about storing these extra crops, right? Did not begin farming, doesn't fit. We're able to store the extra crops. So again, with these ones, before I even go into my answers, I'm always trying to anticipate the direction that they were trying to push us, right? Gonna be D here. Number 16, we have a study about memory. These people presented mice with memory tests. They discovered that these fan cells are necessary for the acquisition of new memories. Okay, cool. So I would say this is kind of like their first point. Fan cells are connected to new memories, right? They also found, so this is going to be like point number 2. They also found that fan cell activity requires dopamine, the chemical the brain produces in response to pleasure and rewards. So something that would trigger dopamine would then trigger these fan cells to be able to remember new stuff. So consequently, as a result, receiving a reward should produce dopamine, which should therefore stimulate these fan cells to remember more stuff. So I see the words decrease. I know A and D are going to be wrong. It should definitely be increase. Increase in individuals' capacity to recognize differences between things. Let's see if there's a better answer. Increase in individuals' capacity to form memories. So this is their whole point, is that the reward should produce dopamine, should stimulate the fan cells to increase their ability to make new memories. Going to be C here. 17, jumping into the grammar section. I'll go straight to my blank space here. Some historians, so plural, claim that this tulip mania was the first historical evidence. So again, it's just going to be B here. We want no S when our subject is plural. We want claims if it was a singular subject, but B is going to fit perfect here. Number 18, in her 2 major series, Painter Pindell explored themes of healing, self-discovery, and memory by cutting and sewing back. Okay, so we got a lot of punctuation here. No need for a comma pause. We're not trying to create like a non-essential clause or anything here. I don't see a second em dash. So again, 99% of the time that's going to be a wrong. When we do see an em dash in C by itself, it's actually going to mimic a colon. So technically C and D are kind of the same answer. And we don't need to do a colon list either. Remember that on the SAT, they're always going to conclude colon lists with a period. So if we did use a colon here, colon, healing, self-discovery, and memory, you would see a period right here. They always conclude colon lists with a period. This continues. We're going to just go with continuation here in A. Number 19, jump straight to our blank space. A recent study, singular, explains why. So again, this is your classic contrast of usually you would have an explains and an explain here. When it's a singular subject, we need the S. If it was plural, studies, we would have just explain. A for this one. Number 20, we have Bonnie of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. I'm seeing like studies data about Saturn's rings collected by the spacecraft when. This when completely gives it away. Remember that when is going to pair with was. Let's retry that again. Bonnie of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory was studying data when she made a discovery. So was and when are going to pair together, gives it away. Going to be D for this one. Number 21, we have some apostrophe practice. Remember with apostrophes, there's going to be a couple rules we want to go through. First, when it's before and when it's after the S. When it's before the S, we're saying it is a singular subject. You might say something like the teacher's apostrophe S water bottle. You're saying a singular teacher possesses a water bottle. If I said, like in D, teachers apostrophe after the S water bottles, I would be saying the plural teachers water bottles. So already the problem I see looking at my answer choices here is the object that they possess should immediately follow our apostrophe word. So if I see that these stories possess something, I should immediately follow with what they possess. Of isn't something that's going to be possessed. It's always going to be a noun. If it was like the singular stories elements, the singular stories theme, right? Something that is a noun that a story could possess. I see the singular stories of, the plural stories of. I know that we're not going to possess of here. So this is just saying stories without possession. Stories of the South Asian immigrants. So really not too bad here. It's going to be C. Number 22, a lot of great punctuation rules here. In the punctuation section, a lot of times I'm jumping straight to my answers. Here we have everything, our colon, comma, semicolon, and period. So specific to the SAT, this is going to be different from your English class. Your periods are going to be equal to your semicolons. That is untrue in a single case, and you'll have to watch for future examples of this. When your semicolon is used in a list, it is different from a period. Other than that, we can see that this is in a list here. These two I can cross off, which makes this much easier. Again, we can look at colon roles. A colon is going to list something. A colon is going to help us pause when we go from like something broad to something more specific. Let's go through our context here. I see that the lifespans of rockfish vary greatly. So they're probably going to give two examples that contrast, maybe something with a short life and something with a long life. So for instance, the colorful rockfish can survive for a little over a decade, while this other rockfish can live for up to 2 centuries. So right there, am I going from broad to specific, or am I listing things? Well, they already started our list. They gave us example 1. I'm not going to put a colon after one example that lists a second example. You might put a colon before listing both examples, right? I'm also not going broad to specific. I've already given an example. I've already specified our first example, and now we're giving our second example. All our comma does here is help us transition from example 1, while, to example 2. Perfect example of when we can use a comma. It's going to be D here. Number 23, I see that unlike most other species of barnacle, the turtle barnacles, plural, can dissolve the cement-like secretions they use to attach themselves to a sea turtle, enabling the barnacles to move a short distance. So this one's great. They're really trying to emphasize that our subject is plural here, right? It's not attaching itself to a sea turtle. It's attaching, they are attaching themselves. So that's our only discretion here. Is it a singular subject? Is it a plural subject? And it's going to be a plural subject here. Number 24, getting into our transition section, we have these small structures are found on the tips of spiders' legs. They temporarily bond with atoms of whatever they touch. Blank, they are able to cling and climb almost any surface. So our most basic transition rule is like, are we changing or are we continuing? Again, they bond with whatever they touch. They're able to cling and climb. So I don't see a change here. I see that we are continuing. However, would be a change. It's not going to fit here. Looking at some of our other answers here that we want to try to contrast them. Similarly, while it sounds like similar, it actually usually describes two different subjects doing two different actions. So like you might have a character from a book doing this action. Similarly, this other character from maybe the same book is doing another action. So there is some similarity between what's happening, but in this case, it's the same subject doing something, you know, as a result of what they're able to do. So I don't see similarly fitting here, but it can still be hard to see the difference between these two. For instance is going to be the same thing as for example, same thing as particularly. The main way that we use that is we said something very broad and now we're specifying, right? Specifically might also match here, match with for instance. So are we going broad to specific here? They temporarily bond with the atoms of whatever they touch. They're able to cling and climb to almost any surface. I don't see a departure from broad to specific here. It sounds like they're on the same, they have the same level of detail. So that's why for instance is not going to fit here. We'll go over good examples of like, wow, they said something really broad. Now they're giving us really specific examples. This is just going to be as a result, or like therefore, because they bond to whatever they touch, they can climb to almost any surface. Going to be D here. Number 25, we have they considered this volcano to be the largest shield volcano by volume, measuring this blank. According to a 2020 study, the shield volcano is significantly larger. Okay, so we have a contrast here. They thought that this 74,000 volcano was the biggest. Actually, it turns out it's this 148,000. So let's try to look for a contrast here. Secondly is going to be continuing. We're not continuing, we're contrasting. Here's an example that is different from what we thought, right? Consequently, as a result, is also continuing. Moreover is also continuing. Finally, we have a changing transition. However, so again, however, we thought this, however, here is a result that was different than what we expected. It's going to be D here. Number 26, we have these researchers prepared a stew from a 4,000-year-old recipe. They tasted the dish, known as unwinding, and they found that it had a mild taste and inspired calm. Blank, the researchers, knowing that they were sometimes named after their intending effects, theorized that the dish's name unwinding referred to its function, help them relax. So again, our most basic transition rule, are we continuing? Are we changing? Definitely continuing. Here's an experiment, here's the taste, and here's what their theory was because of those results, right? So I get rid of my changing answers. Alternatively is changing. Nevertheless, changes, we would have a different direction after our start. Not the case here. Now we have therefore and likewise. So therefore is going to be we just got practice with as a result. It's like a conclusion, right? Likewise is going to be similar to similarly. Remember, that's when you have like a subject in a book doing one thing. Likewise, you have another subject in that book doing another thing. This is the same subject. Again, they're theorizing, they are concluding that the dish's name unwinding referred to its function. Remember, causing that kind of calm feeling. We're going to go with therefore here because this is the researchers concluding. Likewise would be describing a different subject doing a different action, not the case here. Number 27, onto the notes section. Again, with most of these, we can jump straight from our question to our answers. We need an explanation and an example of fauna. Let's try to find both of those. So the term fauna is a combination of the words flora and fauna. So a little bit of an explanation, but I don't see an example, right? So I'll get rid of that. They use the term fauna, a combination of that and that, to describe the subjects of surreal paintings, plant-animal hybrids, such as a parrot with leaves for feathers. This I would answer right away. They explain what the term means, and they give us an example of what fauna could be. Just to look at the other two, created nectar refers to the subjects of his paintings. So that's an example of his work, but we still don't know what fauna means. D, the subjects of this and this are types of fauna, a term that he uses when describing his artworks. Again, those are examples of his paintings. I still don't know what fauna means. We're going to go with B here.